Support for Headline Humboldt is made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Coming up next on Headline Humboldt, a local judge has again ruled against an effort by environmental groups to fight Caltrans over the embattled Richardson's Grove U.S. Highway 101 expansion project. Also, Nezzie Wade from Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives will join us to talk about Hunger and Homeless Awareness Week, especially its relevance now as Humboldt County faces a punishing storm. Coming up now on Headline Humboldt. From the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. Some 18 years ago, myself and a colleague at the Eureka Times-Standard undertook a reporting project that opened my eyes in many ways to the plight of homeless in Humboldt County. For 3 days, then crime reporter Chris Durant and I lived as homeless vagrants. We entered Eureka from the south along U.S. Highway 101, wandered through the dense and wretched abandoned industrial sites behind the Bayshore Mall, and ended up at the soup kitchen. When asked, we gave our history as to our origin. We were ostensibly traveling up the coast, but no one really asked or cared. We slipped in among the throngs awaiting a meal at the St. Vincent de Paul free meal program and spent 3 days eating meals there and wandering about town and making camp under the Eureka Slough Bridge. It was cold. On the third night, frost fell. And because we were camping on the Samoa Peninsula by this time, we built a fire out of the only wood we could find, an ancient rail tie slathered with creosote. The toxic fumes from such fuel immediately gave me a migraine, and our little experiment took a sudden and painful turn. It was one of the longest nights of my life. All I needed was an ibuprofen, but we were miles from the city and didn't have any money. Coupled with the freezing temperatures, I was in misery. I cuddled up next to my thankfully rather large reporting partner and felt extremely sorry for myself. I did finally sleep for a couple of hours, enough to significantly dampen the headache, and in the morning we walked back to town and the experiment came to an end a few hours later. I was wet, cold, dirty, and miserable from 3 days. There are folks even now living on the streets who've been doing so for decades, and I was never really homeless. So that makes a difference. In a few moments, I'll speak with Nezzie Wade from the Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives about the plight of Humboldt County's homeless community. For now, to me, it's obvious that addressing the issue of homelessness is an absolute necessity. Its ongoing reality says something pretty bleak about the state and character of our communities. As we cuddle up with our families this storm season, content to watch through panes of glass the fury of a bomb cyclone wreaking havoc, remember that we're all lucky to be on this side of the window. Others don't necessarily have that privilege. Now, the news. State officials this past week decided to rename more than 30 locations in more than a dozen counties to strip a racial slur off maps and signage. The word, which I won't say outright today out of respect for our viewers, is a pejorative. One of those places is in Humboldt County near the southern edge of Fieldbrook, will now be christened the Solatluck word for Fieldbrook, Dola Weir's Ugwakan. The creek itself, for which the bridge was named, will now go by Tip Top Ridge Creek, a name selected by the United States Geologic Survey. The new name of the bridge was first suggested by the Wiyot tribe at the request of county staff and then approved by the Bear River Band of the Ronaville Rancheria. A small privately owned road in Fieldbrook retains the offensive appellation, a situation that is out of the county hands. Here is a partial explanation as to how the term is seen by Native Americans.
This word has always had a negative connotation. It's been regarded as a pejorative, but to be fair, there are some people in our Native community that have had fond relationships with it, and that is the effect, I believe, of colonization, of assimilation, and people not really understanding how profound it is. And when I say there is a small minority, it makes it divisive, but by and large, if you were to use this word and go to any kind of powwow, tribal ceremony, and call a woman this word, you probably wouldn't be met with kindness.
As first reported by the Times-Standard, local judge Timothy Canning, for the third time, ruled against environmental groups in opposition to the long-running effort to expand the Richardson's Grove section of U.S. Highway 101. The legal battle has gone on for more than a decade and a half. Caltrans has been working to expand the road there, allowing standard-sized semi-trucks passage through a 1.1-mile-long bottleneck that has long kept them out. This week, Canning dismissed a writ of injunction that sought to compel Caltrans to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. The effort was filed by the Environmental Protection Information Center, the Center for Biological Diversity, Californians for Alternative to Toxins, and other groups and individuals. They claim the project will damage the roots of old-growth redwoods and other trees in the area, resulting in harm done to the trees, wildlife, and the community. Caltrans, meanwhile, maintains that no old-growth trees will be cut down and points to its environmental review documents, which say that through mitigation measures, the project will not have a significant impact on the environment. Canning says in his ruling that Caltrans has complied with its CEQA requirements. As quoted in the Lost Coast Outpost, Canning said, "Future events may well prove Caltrans wrong, but perfection in prediction is not the standard for CEQA review." We'll be right back with Nezzie Wade after this short break.
The Keat Travel Auction is live, and supporting Keat has never been more rewarding. Our travel auction turns your support into a vacation of a lifetime. With 4-star accommodations, a dedicated travel specialist to plan your trip, and flexible 3-year window to book, you'll be set for a fantastic adventure. Bidding is open now and closes November 23rd. So place your bids now and secure your dream vacation before it's too late.
Life is complicated enough. Why worry about what to do with your extra car? Skip the costs of maintaining it, storing it, insuring it, or renewing registration. Car repairs? Forget about it. Here's one easy solution to your car problem. Donate it to our station. It's fast, free, tax deductible, and if you donate, you're going to feel incredible knowing you're supporting quality programming. Interested? Just call this toll-free number or donate online. Thank you.
Joining me now in studio is Nezzie Wade from Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives, or AHA Humboldt. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for highlighting Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week.
Absolutely. It's an important issue. And, you know, I want to make sure people know that the intro, I was talking about the story where I went on a reporting jaunt for 3 days. I was not homeless, and that was a major looming fact the whole time I was out there. I was aware that I wasn't homeless, and that made the whole experience a lot different for me, and also I think even gave me a little bit more insight into the fact how awful it would have been to not have a place to go when it was all over with and not having an end date. It's just kind of an open-ended thing. I can imagine how stressful and anxiety-producing that would be. But we're in the middle of a massive storm, as you're aware and I'm aware, and the community is, and people are out living in those conditions, and you have been out today and all week serving people. What's that been like? How are people holding up in the weather, and what kind of services are you guys providing for folks?
Well, I think it's hard to speak for anyone who is homeless unless you have that experience or are involved in it. This week is extremely challenging because we have, by the point in time count, identified 1,573 people in our county that are unhoused, and that's really an undercount, always is, but 1,194 of them are unsheltered, and so these people have nowhere to go, and we have very poor shelter options. And that's not to say that the ones we have aren't any good. They're great, but we don't have enough to support people, and people are really unable to get to those shelters and live in a way that's really confining for them. So I think it's very tough. We have been trying to support people where they are by bringing food and supplies. Today we were in Arcata at the transit center, and it's horrible conditions. I came in soaking wet, as you saw. And we handed out ponchos, ripstop, really good ripstop ponchos that could be ground covers, tents, ponchos, tarps, and hats and socks and all the other things, hygiene and clothing, and people who wanted to could get showers. We also had someone who was giving haircuts after people had their showers, which was really a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and that's part of the caravan program that you guys have, right?
Yes, it's part of the mobile shower caravan. And I want to shout out to all of our volunteers. We're all volunteer. We do pay our driver, but he does a lot of work that's in addition to his job. We have the most wonderful volunteers, and we rely on them to do all the services and the outreach and things that we do now. So, and I want to shout out to the community too. The community has supported us so well, and of course, if you like the shower program and you like AHA and what the alternative housing options that we're trying to bring for sheltering and so forth, continue to support us, because now is the best time to do that. It's more possible now than ever. So.
Yeah. This is an interesting week. The two kind of lined up where the weather was really bad. And, it's this awareness week. And I think that hammers home the point even more that the alternatives that we have for folks who are unhoused and are seeking to come in from the cold, so to speak, are insufficient. And one of the things you guys are known for is that you are sort of outside the box of conventional thinking. Can you explain for our viewers what's different about your organization in terms of how you envision helping folks who don't have homes?
Well, we first of all want to set up a situation where people can help themselves and take care of themselves and what they really need to do, and to help be a bridge to community. And that would be in a setting where people are helping each other. And instead of relying just on the program that they're affiliated with and case managers and that kind of stuff, not that people wouldn't need those kinds of supports, but not everybody does. And people really want to just have a place to vest, and then, if possible, move on from there. And that's the whole idea, is getting people into a secure place where then they can thrive from there. We have some anomalies in our system as well. We don't really have a good continuum of housing, so to speak. We do have a lot of affordable housing projects and some that are coming online, but you have to have a minimum income to get into those generally. Like the three that are been in the news for Eureka have a $16,000 entry-level income that you have to have, and $54,000 as at the top. So the people that we're really wanting to address and assist having a place that they really would like to be and be able to be living more normally, like rather than having to be under surveillance with the camera and people showing their IDs and all that, living in an environment that more speaks to normalcy and people having dignity and thriving and that sort of thing. And we're very different in that regard. The state is funding programs that are institutionalized. They're being operated by program operators that are willing to do the surveillance and to have all those things. Having an alternative village environment doesn't mean that you don't have security or you don't have things that will protect folks, but it does mean that people have more freedom to help one another and to prepare food and have community. And it's the difference between creating an ordinance. We have a tiny house village ordinance now, and we have a dependent unit and an alternative lodge park ordinance for emergency housing. And those things are now possible to do, but they're kind of very expensive projects to do. And so the idea of being able to do something now that could be supported by the community and could have mutual aid and volunteers. We have a proposal that has our staff being residents, volunteers, board members, and some paid staff as well. But it allows for much more integration of community and folks rather than just enforcement of ordinance, policy, code, and all of those things.
I mean, to me, it sounds like by having people live in a situation like that, you're empowering sort of their humanity and giving them a reason to want to be there and live rather than being basically incarcerated. I mean, before the show, you were saying that a lot of people don't want to stay at those sort of bigger shelter programs because they remind them of prisons and jails, and for some folks, that's not the place that they want to go. In addition to which, they have to give up some of their most prized possessions, whether that's pets, their partners, and what was the other P?
Pets, partners, and possessions.
And possessions,
but
yes,
the other
everything.
The other thing that people give up often is community. Because with a Housing First policy like we have in Humboldt County, those who are on the list and have the highest priority to get into housing will go into whatever housing is available. If they live in South County and the housing is in North County, they can go into housing there. That's their opportunity. If they want to get into housing, they should take advantage of that. But it separates them from their community, and people want to be together. And so our model was to take people where they are, create an environment in which they can thrive before we decimated the population by pushing it in all directions, and then allowing people to have the roles that they were playing in their encampments for the water bearer, the cook, the mechanic, the people that ran the errands and that's how people want to live, just like you would in your neighborhood or, family kind of life.
Well, that brings up an interesting point that, I think that people miss is that, like, even though we want to look at these communities that spring up in the wilds of Humboldt County at times as blight, they form basically communities. I mean, people have roles there, there's a social structure, and a lot of times people get to where they're really familiar and comfortable with that. And by eradicating that and basically shoving people into randomized boxes, that can at times be sort of dehumanizing and make them feel like they're no longer a part of that community, right? I mean,
Well, yeah.
and that's problematic, I imagine.
It can be very problematic, and people don't really have a say in how they are living. The model that we use comes from Andrew Heben's book on tent city urbanism that was an outgrowth of his master's project, where he visited encampments across the country to take on best practices. How could people live together, and what makes it work for them, and what would be the best and easiest way for them to transition into housing? And then they developed Opportunity Village in Eugene, and they've been very successful at doing that. Beyond that, people need to have other options, like I mentioned before, whether it's cooperative housing or social housing or something else that allows them to go on but remains affordable. And that's the worst thing. We don't have any affordable housing really for people. A lot of people work. A lot of people have subsidies.
Yeah, the homeless aren't always just totally destitute. A lot of times they just don't have enough money to make that final.
Right, because you have a first and a last, and you have to have a security deposit, and you have to pay a property management organization to help you access housing, and there's a lot of things that get in the way, and people that are unhoused don't have the convenience of picking up the phone all the time or being able to get mail and messages. It's a very complicated life, and if there's ways that we can simplify that and work with people to actually understand, homelessness is, we did this thing at the courthouse yesterday. We had a gathering, and it was to highlight and underscore the fact that in this horrific weather, we have people that don't have access to just simple things like food.
Yeah.
And so we had warm soup and bread and pumpkin bread and some beverage, and people who came along, there were many people who told their stories about having been previously unhoused and living in their car, and what that meant, and what they had to go through.
Yeah.
And the reality is that programs really have a very specific way they work with people, and you have to be on the coordinated entry system list, and you have to have a high vulnerability score, or you have to be affiliated for a rather lengthy time to be able to get into housing. And people need some shelter, some protection now to thrive.
Exactly
they have
right.
jobs, they have started businesses. That's part of what the village would be a workshop that would allow people to do whatever it is they want to do for their metallurgy or jewelry or whatever business opportunities would be there to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now you mentioned that you guys don't get the support of some of these larger programs because you're not following sort of that typical, more industrial model, and so you depend on the community for its support, and that's how you guys do what you do, both with volunteers and I imagine cash aid. What can people do? What do you need, and how can people figure out how to give?
The best thing that people could do is help us build the organization, and really, if you're committed to helping people that are experiencing homelessness, we have a really good opportunity to do that. But we need people we're a working board. So we need people who are willing to come on and be decision makers. We need volunteers always, because we rely on volunteers for all of our outreach services. We have monthly meetings where we try to feature some program or something that's happening to folks in community related to this. We have things coming up in December. We're going to do something for International Human Rights Awareness Day, because this is very much related to human rights.
Absolutely.
We have every December on solstice, we have Homeless Persons Memorial Day, or a Remembrance Day for those who have lost their lives while being homeless. We lose 3 to 4 people a month to the street here, James.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And in October, when we had Overdose Awareness Day, by that time of the year, there'd been 80 people who had lost their lives in this community, not necessarily just homeless, but in this community due to overdose. And you have to have programs that support the whole person. And people use drugs. People have mental health issues. And a lot of people who do drugs and have mental health issues have homes and protection around them, but a lot of people don't. Yeah. And it takes a great deal of understanding to know how to have harm reduction housing, or how to have harm reduction and attend to people's needs without having really institutional setting.
Yeah, and the thing is, with people that are in those situations, if they're addicted, they're not going to be able to stop, so they still deserve housing. Even though they're suffering from whatever addiction or other issue, they still need help.
Well, and the whole idea of harm reduction is really to give people an opportunity to be, if they're active drug users, support them in doing that, but provide them with the opportunities or options for making other choices. And eventually people do. You know, if you look at this, the person who coined the term housing first, it was people, when you get them into housing, they fail. And they fail, and they fail, and they fail. But at some point they don't. And we don't have a lot of tolerance in our programs. If someone isn't successful in a program, they're done. And there's very little compassion. And I think we're probably very, very compassionate. We love the people. We are the people who love the people. And they love us. And so it's a good match. We should be supported to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just to be clear, I didn't succeed quitting heroin the first time. It took me several tries. And so it's not necessarily the first time that gets you across the finish line. It's being willing to keep trying in the face of failure that makes people succeed. And I think that we all need to be cognizant of that and support them through that process. Otherwise, we're never going to have people recover. A couple of institutional issues I wanted to sort of touch on again. You mentioned that we consistently have an undercount of the homeless here. Can you sort of describe what the issues are with the quote-unquote pit count and what we can do maybe to eventually fix that, or is there anything?
Well, it's what we do. When you have HUD money that comes to your community, you're required to have a continuum of care. And so our continuum of care generally manages the point-in-time count, which HUD requires you to do. And they do it one day, and I've participated in it all years until recent times, and I have personal reasons why I haven't, but one day in winter, they count people, and it used to be that they had, interviews that they would get more information. Now they just need to identify that people look like they're homeless, or that they know that they're homeless, and they can add them up.
Which is already not scientific, right?
Right.
I mean, yeah.
But with that count this year, we had 1,573 people in Humboldt County that were identified as unhoused. That's a big number, but we know it's an undercount because we don't count people on private property. We don't count the people we don't see. Of that number, though, 1,194 were identified as unsheltered. That's a huge number. So 379 people were in shelters of those that were unhoused.
Oh, that's a massive percentage.
It is.
Yeah.
And if you look at a population of Humboldt County, that's like 1.2% of the county is unhoused. And so, I mean, that's a big number. And it's probably much bigger than that. Yeah. And if you look at the poverty level of this county, it's extremely high. Food Bank serves 15% of the county every month.
Yeah.
So we know that we have poverty. We know that we have a lot of issues in Humboldt County that we can't treat Humboldt County, our region, which is a region unto itself, like other regions. We're very rural and we're outposted, but we have still the same needs that everybody else does.
Yeah.
And so with the point in time count, one of the things that well, this wasn't the point in time count. When we do the Homeless Persons Memorial Day, we get statistics from the coroner on the number of deaths from the death logs. And the partnership has said the average age of death for people in Humboldt County is 77.2 years. The average age of death for people who are unhoused is 48.3. That's 28.9% fewer years of life for those people who are left in the conditions that we are not willing to address through our resources.
And the problem, partially at least, is that the way that a lot of people look at the homeless is as criminals or somehow, outside of their circle of care, and that's what needs to change in part. I mean, these are people who, like you were saying, just don't have enough money sometimes to make that extra payment to get into a house or whatever else. I mean, they're just human beings, and we need to view them as such and care for them as much as we care for anybody else.
A lot of people do see the unhoused as criminal, but the criminality that they're experiencing is people are living in public.
Exactly.
Their crimes are things like urination, public drunkenness, and sometimes it's loitering, sleeping, yes.
Yeah.
And they're getting ticketed if they have an animal. And there's a lot of things that people want to have that connection that you make with your fur babies, and they want to have that connection you make with people, but they can't gather, they can't do things like the rest of us, and yet they're probably more human than most of us.
Yeah, and the problem with the whole ticketing notion is that you give them a financial penalty when they don't have the money to find a place to live, and that just starts to snowball, and you end up in a hole that you can never get out of. I mean, that whole system of penalizing folks I've never understood, especially for the poor, because it just makes their situation that much worse.
It drives them further into poverty and farther away from homelessness.
Yeah.
And I have a friend right now who got ticketed in Arcata, and they're facing $700 worth of fine, which they could never pay. And the alternative is they can go to jail and do their time, or, well, their case hasn't come up exactly, so time will tell next week what happens. But it's with so many people, and it hurts your heart to know that there are people who just would be very happy, but they've been driven to the margins. And when we try to pull people in for sheltering and that kind of stuff, and give them a point that they can catch a transport, that's a wonderful offer. Yeah. But people who've been pushed out have a really hard time thinking it's going to be something friendly when they go there.
Yeah, and that's what's happening right now with the storms and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. People are maybe reluctant to go to the gathering points because they've had distrust issues, and so they may not be able to take advantage of the shelter in the stormy weather. We've only got 45 seconds left. I wanted to make sure we gave people your web address, which is, do we have that real quick? There it is, AHA Humboldt, so HHA-humco.org.
Yes.
And they can go there and get information and learn how to give and
you
volunteer.
You can volunteer online. You can inquire about, you can submit an email from there if you are interested in being on our board or volunteering or contributing in some way. We accept donations of financially or donations that we can pass on to people. And we are direct service. You give, they get.
Yeah, you're in the field all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming in and for doing the work that you do.
Thank you.
That's it for this week. Remember to check out our podcast, Neon Galactic, on all podcast platforms and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@NeonGalactic. I'm headed to the Soul Symposium this weekend, so we'll have coverage of that next week. Stay tuned.